thank you for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and get started. And I am going to do the introduction today, and I am absolutely pleased and I am so happy to have as a guest speaker with us today at this very important webinar, Cindy Light. She is the Senior Vice President Partner of Coldwell Banker Commercial. And she is here with us. Cindy, say hi.
Good morning, all. Thank you so much for joining us.
All right, so let's begin. The topics that we're going to be discussing today, which I think are very interesting, and I think they should be very interesting to you and hopefully very helpful, is we're going to be discussing what can be done or what happens when your most valuable asset, your home, is gifted, inherited, or sold. And we're going to talk to you about how we can protect the value of your home and obviously ways to protect your home. And also then Cindy will talk to us and bring us up to date on commercial real estate, which is a very interesting topic for all of us to understand in today's volatile market. Okay, what I am going to be talking about, and that is your house. The most valuable asset, or at least one of the most valuable assets that you have, is your home. And I'm going to be using as an example a modest home, not really modest in today's real estate values, but let's assume that the house was purchased for $200,000. The taxes at that time, about 1%, were $2,000. And now the property is worth $1.5 million. So this is typically what has happened over the years, especially now with the increase in inflation factors and so forth. And the options that we generally have when we have a home is you can sell it, obviously. So what are the pros and cons of selling the house? You can give it away, or you can inherit the property. So what are the consequences when we do either sell, gift, or inherit? Well, first of all, I want to explain a concept called cost basis, or step up in cost basis, or adjustment to cost basis. Cost basis is generally the term that is used for what you paid for an asset. In other words, if you buy stock, let's assume you bought Twitter stock, you paid $10 a share, that's your cost. That is cost basis. That's generally the value from which capital gains are measured, or a gain is measured on an asset. So on real estate is generally what you paid for it. Now, determining cost basis is a little bit more complicated than what I'm describing, but the principle basically is that you paid for an asset, the cost basis, and the example that I gave you about the home, which cost $200,000, the couple or the family paid $200,000, but it's now worth $1.5 million. So the difference between the $1.5 million and the $200,000, that's gain. So in this example, there's $1,300,000 of gain built in. So what happens if you sell it? Well, you have to figure out, is it short-term or long-term? In other words, have you held it less than a year, or have you held the property longer than 1 year? And depending on whether it's short-term or long-term, then the capital gains is, like shown on the screen, 50% if your income is between $40,000 roughly and $445,000. But if the income is above $445,000, then the capital gains is 20%. So when you think about the gain that's built into this property of $1.3 million, and let's assume that we're going to apply a 20% capital gains when you sell it, that is a lot of money that is going to be paid in capital gains tax. So selling a property, you can probably or may incur capital gains. So how do you offset capital gains? Well, if you have losses, for example, with other properties, you can offset the gains by the losses. Or, as you well know, if you have a primary residence, let's assume that this was your primary residence, then you could use another exclusion of capital gains, which is using code section 121, which is basically that all of us have the ability to shelter from capital gains $250,000 each. A couple of them would be eligible to shelter $500,000. So that would be one way to then decrease the bite of the capital gains tax. Another way is there is another type of trust. You may know it by a charitable remainder trust. We call it the capital gain avoidance trust, because this type of trust is exactly what the name is, and that is there's a way for you to avoid the capital gains, and that is basically you transfer the property into this type of trust, and once it is transferred to the trust, if it's sold then by the trust, there's no capital gains paid, and in addition, you will get income tax benefits over 5 years, and you may wind up also with an income stream for the rest of your life or for a term of years. So this is generally called a charitable remainder trust or capital gain avoidance trust. Now, this is a very complicated advanced planning tool, but yet it is something that can be used to eliminate or reduce capital gains tax. It's an important concept. So if you sell the property, you may wind up incurring capital gains tax. So what is the next option that you could have with your home? Well, why don't we give it away? A lot of people want to give the house away. So let's assume that you want to give the house away. So then you're going to be dealing with gift tax. So what is gift tax? Gift tax is the federal levying of a tax on transfers during your lifetime. I want to remind you that there's two different code sections. The one that everybody's more familiar with is you can give away $16,000 per person as the annual gift tax exclusion to anybody in the world every year. But that is a separate code section from the other code section that basically says that we all have the ability in 2022, this year, to give away $12,060,000 as gifts, and that would be exempt from any gift tax. So gifting is possible without incurring a gift tax. So what are the negatives or the options when you give it away? Well, this is always asked of me is when I give the house away, is my beneficiary that I gave the house to, are they going to pay a gift tax? They're called the donee. You're the donor. The person who receives the property is called the donee. And the question is then, is he or she going to pay a gift tax? The answer is no. Then the next question is, wait a minute, but I'm the one to give away the house. Am I, as a donor, going to have to pay a gift tax? The answer is no. However, the number that I gave you, the $12,060,000, that amount that is exempt from gift tax is the same amount that is also exempt at death from federal estate tax. So think of the $12,060,000 as a coupon. In other words, you have a coupon worth $12,060,000. If you give away some of the coupon during life, then you only have the remainder amount left at death to transfer. So you do have to file a gift tax return, which is Form 709, if you give away more than that $16,000 per person. So the answer is there's no gift tax to the donee, there's no gift tax to the donor, but you do have to file a 709 gift tax return. So you can also gift to a trust. This is kind of an advanced planning technique where you can use the gift to a trust and also retain the step-up benefits. I want to go back one more slide because it is, I think, important that I address the following issue on this slide that I went back up. When you give the property away, here is the problem. The problem is that the donee will receive your existing cost base. And therefore, if you give him the $1.5 million home, your original cost base, remember, was only $200,000. That's the cost basis that they will have. And therefore, then if they sell it, they will incur the capital gains tax. That's the point that I wanted to make on that other slide. So selling the house, you're going to incur capital gains tax, possibly. Giving the house away, let's say, to somebody, you're going to be transferring the existing cost basis that you had in the example, $200,000. You give them the house, they sell it, they're going to possibly incur capital gains tax. Now I'm going to switch over to another subject. A lot of, I'll call it, people that we talk to wind up putting a child on title with them on their home. I want to address this because it's important that you understand what are the pros and cons of doing this. A lot of times people will do that as they feel that it is an easy way to transfer a particular property to a particular child. And I just want to make sure that we go through what happens when you put a child on title or somebody else on title with you. Number one is, under California law, there is what's called the change of ownership. The change of ownership occurs when you either sell the property or gift it away or you inherit it. But also, if you add another person on title with you, you are now changing the ownership of that property. Let's assume that the property was owned by husband and wife. So we have Jack and Jill, parents owning the property, and they're going to put little Ben on title with them. You change ownership. So if you change ownership under California law, then what happens is the Board of Equalization is going to come back and say, hey, wait a minute, there's been a change of ownership. We may want to reassess the property. So there's a reassessment issue by placing the other individual on title with you on the home. Second, you now put somebody, maybe your beneficiary, on title with you, which they could have inherited, and therefore they're going to be losing the opportunity for what we call the step up, which is, let me explain what the step up is that when you transfer property by inheritance, I will cover this in another slide, but the change of the cost basis is increased to equal the fair market value of the property at the time of death. So by putting another person on title with you, they will lose the opportunity of the step up in cost basis had you given them the property as an inheritance. Next, if your child is on title with you on your home, what happens if your child gets involved in an auto accident? He may get sued. What do you think is going to happen to your house? His name is on your home, so your property may be subject to lawsuits. Also, let's assume that you have 3 children. Most parents want to have an equal distribution to children. But if you have one child on title to a house, it's possible that you will wind up with an unequal distribution, meaning that the child that's on title may wind up getting the house when maybe you did not want that particular child to be the sole beneficiary of that particular property. So, change of ownership, possible reassessment, possible loss of step up, property subject to lawsuits, unequal distribution. Is it a good or bad idea to put somebody else on title with you? You decide. Another important topic when we deal with title to property. And everybody has different opinion as to how to hold title. When you buy a piece of property, generally when you talk to a real estate agent, not one that's highly educated like Cindy, that most advice that they give you is, well, why don't you put everything in joint tenancy? Or maybe somebody will say to the couple, why don't you put it as community property? Or why don't you hold it as tenants in common? So what do all these things mean? And what are the tax consequences of this? Well, most everybody knows what joint tenancy is. That's when two or more individuals hold title to a piece of property. And generally what joint tenancy means is that when one owner of a piece of property dies, the surviving joint tenant takes title to the property by what we call operation of law. Community property is title held by husband and wife, and there's another community property title, which is called community property with right of survivorship. Now, if you have title as community property between a husband and wife, what I'm going to say to you is going to shock you, because assume that the husband and wife are on title to a home as community property. Now, remember, I'm not talking about a trust or anything like that at this point. I'm just talking about plain community property on title to a piece of property. If a spouse dies, the surviving spouse does not automatically get that community property interest. Wait a minute, what are you talking about? We're married. We bought the property together. We're holding property as community property. When my husband dies, you mean I'm not going to get that community property interest? The answer is no, you're not going to get that automatically. Your spouse has to leave it to you. Each of you have the ability to transfer your community property interest to whomever you want. There's another then title holding alternative in California called community property with right of survivorship. Now, if you hold title in that manner between a husband and wife, that way, when the husband or wife dies, that particular way of holding title, they will then automatically transfer the interest to the surviving spouse. So that's important to understand. Another form of holding title is tenants in common. What does that mean? That means that two individuals hold title to a piece of property, but there is no survivorship. And the tenants in common, they can have different percentages. You can have one tenant, for example, have 50%, the other 50%, or you can have one tenant maybe have 40% and the other one 60%. So those are the ways title can be held. So now let's talk about what happens. If you have ownership as joint tenancy and one of the joint tenant dies, yes, title will transfer it. What happens with the cost basis of the property for future capital gains avoidance? Only one half will get the step up because only one half of the ownership died. The other half is still owned by the other joint tenant. So only one half will get the step up in cost basis, and that may cause a potential capital gains tax when the property is sold. Now, if you hold a community property and there's a death, both halves will get the step up in cost basis. So it's definitely a better option to hold it as community property. But remember, you better hold it as community property with right of survivorship, because you will get the benefit of the step up in cost basis, and also you get the benefit of having the right of survivorship like joint tenancy. Tenants in common, for example, they will get a step up, but only on the percentage of ownership that they have. For example, if you only have 40%, then only 40% will get a step up, etc. So holding title to property is critical. It is critical to understand how the form of holding title affects taxation upon sales, gifting, or inheritance. Let's talk a little bit about the federal estate tax. We all know that upon death, the federal government wants to apply tax on any transfer we make at death. Well, this is also the use of the 12,060,000. the 12,060,000 that we were talking about for gifting, that's the same number that is used for federal estate tax exemption. Think about it again as the coupon. You could use the 12,060,000 to give away during life, and what you did not give away during life, then you could give away at death without paying any federal estate tax. And generally transfers to spouses or charity, that federal estate tax does not apply. So let's go one more slide here. There's another advantage if you're married, and that is that if a husband and wife, each of you have the 12,060,000 as an exemption, and let's assume that the husband does not use his exemption, he dies and never uses it, then he can transfer the unused amount of the exemption to the spouse, and then the surviving spouse would have a whopping 24,120,000 to be transferred without any federal estate tax. Now, I want to make a very important point, and that is that the current law that has been increasing the amount that is exempt from gift and federal estate tax has been increasing over the years. If you go back to the 1980s, in the 1980s, the total amount that we could transfer federal estate tax free was only $600,000. So how did we go from 600,000 to 12 million? Well, over the years, the legislation has been increasing then the amount of the exemption. So over the years, it's gone from 600 to 12 million. So we both know the old axiom, what goes up goes down. And the current law that has been increasing the exemption is going to terminate. It's called sunset, terminates in 2025, which means in 2026, the amount that's exempt will be cut in half. So you wake up in 2026, the estate that can be exempt from federal and gift tax is going to run about 6 million. So some of you are saying, what do I care? My estate's only 3 million. Well, let's go back 6 months. I want to ask all of you who have a home, what was your house worth 6 months ago? Has it increased in value? Has it gone up 30, 40%? In some parts of the country, even 50%? Would you ever have believed that your home would be as valuable as it is today because of inflation? So how do you know what's going to happen in the future? How do you know that 6 million may be, oh, I will never have a $6 million estate? It's possible. So therefore, this is another opportunity to have your estate reviewed with the contemplation of the fact that in 2025, the current law is going to terminate and the amount that's exempt will be reduced to half. One more item that's important for you to understand. There's another rule, you can thank the IRS for all this, is that if you gift away an asset within 3 years of death, that asset is pulled back into your estate. So let's assume that you're contemplating that the law is going to change in 2026, and you decide in 2025, last year, that you can transfer 12 million, and then you say, I want to gift away 5 million to my child before the law terminates. And guess what? Then you get subject to the next clawback, which is, wait a minute, you gave away something within 3 years of death, we're going to claw it back into your estate for federal estate taxes. So it is important that you understand that even though that the law is going to sunset in 2025, that there's gifting rules that have to be looked at. And therefore, if you want to do transfers, sales, gift, transfers of the property, you need to talk to us so we can navigate with you what is the best outcome for you. Let's talk about leaving the home as an inheritance then. All right, I hear you, Robert. I'm not going to give the house away. I'm not going to sell it. I'm going to transfer it to my family at my death. Well, that is one option, obviously. And what happens here with regards to the cost basis? Well, the cost basis, this concept is, again, what you paid for is going to be adjusted, is going to be increased to equal whatever the fair market value was of the property at time of death. On the home that I gave you at the beginning as an example, the home was, cost basis was 200,000. That was it was worth 200,000. Now it's worth 1.5 million. Well, guess what? You transfer the property as an inheritance. Now the 200,000 cost basis is stepped up to equal 1.5 million. So the person receives the property 1.5 million. The cost basis is now 1.5 million. No capital gains tax is gone. So if you sell the property at that point, you avoided all the capital gains tax that possibly was built in. But now you have to be careful depending on the size of the property, the size of the estate. Now we have to be careful that we don't navigate inside the other tax consequences, which is the federal estate tax. Because if your estate is larger than the exempt amount, you may be subject to the federal estate tax. And it happens to be around 40 or 45% of the amount that you transfer above the exempt amount. It's not a cheap tax, by the way. It's a very expensive proposition. All right, one more. I hope everybody's aware of Proposition 19. And if you're not aware of Proposition 19, we have done a lot of webinars and presentations, seminars on this subject. You can go to our website. Our website has a lot of material on Proposition 19. But basically what Proposition 19 is, it had turned upside down everything that was part of Proposition 13. And Proposition 13 was a way for the Howard Jarvis push in the 70s to allow then property taxes to be capped at no more than 2% and allow then the property values to increase without the property taxes being increased accordingly, and people were not able to pay the taxes way back in the 70s. So Proposition 13 basically had the ability then to protect the cost basis of property as it was being transferred from generation to generation. And California basically says that a change of ownership, again, by sale, gift, or inheritance may cause the property to be reassessed unless there are certain exemptions that apply. Property taxes may increase because of Proposition 19. Let me explain what that is. There's another, I'll call it good side of Proposition 19, and I'll just briefly give you one slide on that, and that is that the good news about Proposition 19 in reference to moving your personal residence from home to home, if you're a senior over age 55 or severely disabled or a victim of natural disasters, you can now move into a higher cost in the state on any county and retain your lower tax base up to 3 times during your lifetime, as long as the new home that you have is the primary residence within 2 years of the sale or the move to the new home. Now, before Prop 19, you can only move your residence 1 time during your lifetime and only to about 10 counties in California in order for you to be able to keep your old Prop 13 tax base. Now, Prop 19 says, hey, even though you have used the Prop 13 move once, you can still do it again. You can move it up to 3 times in your lifetime and move to any higher cost in the state and keep the old tax base. Now there's some possible reassessment that occur depending on the values of the new home that you are moving into. But this is the good side of Proposition 19. Now the bad side of Proposition 19 is the following. Under Prop 13, by the way, that terminated on February 16, 2021, that's when Prop 19 took into effect. Under Prop 13, you could have transferred your primary residence of any value to your child or grandparent to grandchildren without any reassessment, period. And in addition, you had the ability to transfer up to $1 million of assessed value of other property and have that property or those properties not be reassessed. Prop 13 then was a fantastic tool that had existed for many, many years. And then, folks, I don't know what happened, but we California voters voted Prop 19 to do away with these benefits. And now Prop 19 has the following. It has restricted the transfer of parents' primary home to a child, because the transfer from a parent to a child to the primary home, the child must occupy the property as their primary residence within 1 year, and they have to stay in the home permanently in order to keep the old tax base. How many kids do you know that want to live in grandpa's or parents' home? Hardly anybody. They have their own home. So this is a major restriction that has occurred, and also the ability to transfer other properties without reassessment has completely gone away. There is an advanced planning technique that we can use for future purchases of property, and that is using a technique where we form a limited liability company first, then we take title to property, and then within the realms of the limited liability membership interest, we can avoid certain reassessment. But this is advanced planning. But the advanced planning is available. We do this in our company. I just wanted to make you aware of it. But the main thing that I want you to be aware of is that you are now restricted in the transfers of property to children and grandchildren without reassessment. The dilemma that parents or grandparents have is that if you have several children, who do you want to leave the home to so that they can live in it? You're trying sometimes maybe to make a decision 20 years before your death, or maybe 30 years before your death. And you're wondering, how do I then assign the ownership of a home to one of our children so they do not lose the low cost basis that I have for many, many years? Well, in our documents, in our trust documents, we have added provisions to allow you not to have to make the decision now, but the decision can be made at a later date, because we put into our living trust then the planning opportunity where you can say, I will give child one the right of first refusal to buy the house, or if he doesn't want to do it, I'll give the opportunity to child two. If child two doesn't want to do it, I'll give the opportunity to child three. And then the decision as to who may live in the home can be made years after and not now. And that's all part of our documents. All right, so we covered, you have a house, you want to sell it. Be careful. Reassessment, capital gains tax. You want to gift it away. Be careful. Gift tax. No step up in cost basis. Reassessment. You want to leave the house as inheritance. We covered that. Now, let's add now another issue, which is, and you know this already, you've been to our presentations, you understand how to avoid probate and so forth, but let's talk about it for a few minutes, okay? We want to protect property from probate. Here is what happens. You all know that having your primary home or your property in a trust is mandatory. You know that if it's in the trust, it's going to avoid probate. You know that. But guess what happens, folks? Some of you don't have your home correctly titled in your trust. Or you may have refinanced the house. The finance company asked you to remove the house from the trust so they could do the refinance, and they forgot to put the house back into your trust. So it happens all the time that the house that you think is in the trust is not in the trust because of circumstances that have occurred. And the trust has to own the home in order to avoid property. I'm sorry, The trust has to own the home in order to avoid probate. Misunderstandings in probate. And again, why do I bring this to your attention? Because we are asked these questions on a regular basis. Probate is understandings. Even in our trust documents, you have schedules in the back, and the schedules identify what example, it may identify your home, it may list your home, it may list, for example, a timeshare. It lists properties in their schedules. Just because they're listed on these schedules does not mean that they're owned by the trust. Title change has to occur. If you read the preamble in these schedules, it is the intent of the settlor to transfer this property. It does not, the fact that it's in the schedule, make it part of the trust. So there's a misunderstanding. The trust only avoids probate on asset that is owned. It's only going to own the asset if ownership has changed. Any assets outside of the trust may still need to be probated. So we have to make sure that your assets are correctly titled and your property holdings should be reviewed to make sure that everything that should be in the trust is in the trust. One more item. We are getting older. Of course we are. Guess what? We're living longer. We are no longer dying like we died in the 40s and the 50s. You know, you had a heart attack, that was it. We're now living longer, and therefore, if we live longer, then as we age, we may be subject to illnesses that we cannot control. We may have the misfortune of being involved or being subject to an illness that may cause us to have some form of long-term care. When we have to deal with long-term care, if I ask everybody that's on this call, I want you to raise your hands and tell me how many of you want to go into a nursing home. Oh, I don't see anybody raising your hand. Guess what? If you visit a nursing home, it's full of people. It happens. Statistically, 70% over age 65 may wind up in some form of care. So when you look at the expense of this type of care, in-home care can cost $6,000 a month. A stay in a nursing home per month can run as high as $12,000 a month. 12 times 12, that's $144,000 a year. So who in the heck is going to be able to pay for this? We may have to avail ourselves of the governmental program called Medi-Cal to have the government help us pay for the stays in a nursing home. People are afraid to try to qualify for Medi-Cal because they don't understand the system. There are ways that you can qualify for Medi-Cal by divesting yourself of property ownership in a certain way, the legal way, that we can still qualify people for Medi-Cal. But then people are afraid because they've heard that if you apply for Medi-Cal and Medi-Cal, for example, spends $300,000 on you, that upon your death, they're going to come back and recover from your estate the money that they spent on you. In this example, $300,000. Because it is a requirement when somebody dies to give the Department of Health Services notice that you died, and then they will go through the record and say, oh, we spent $300,000 on bill, and then they will send you a bill saying, hey, we spent $300,000, we want to be repaid. That's Medi-Cal recovery. Every state has this. So people are afraid of that, and sometimes they don't want to, quote, jeopardize their estate, and they don't qualify for Medi-Cal. But when a Medi-Cal recipient dies, the state can seek repayment. That's fact. So, new law went into effect for anybody dying after January 1, 2017. And, excuse me, and what does this new law say? The only thing that California can now recover against is your probate estate. Let me repeat it. The only thing that Medi-Cal is authorized to recover against is your probate estate. And what is not in your probate estate? Property that is in a trust. So property should be correctly titled in the name of your trust, because there's another side benefit, which is that if you wind up on Medi-Cal benefits, they cannot recover against the estate that is not part of probate, and that means that the property that's in your trust is protected. There's other also, call it provisions against recovery, but the main one that I want to discuss with you is the fact that property that's in a trust is protected from Medi-Cal recovery. I also want to make everybody aware of the upcoming changes to Medi-Cal. We will probably be doing an updated Medi-Cal presentation, and I want you to be aware that currently, as we stand today, that a person who's applying for Medi-Cal, they're only allowed to have $2,000 as an asset. And as of July 1 of 2022, in another month or so, then that individual's amount, instead of being $2,000, is going to be increased to $130,000. And if there's another member of the household, same household, for example, a married couple, then for every other qualified member of the household, there's a $65,000 that's added. So therefore, a married couple would have $195,000 now of property, and they could still then qualify for Medi-Cal. This phase is going to be implemented. Then in 2024, which is not yet be implemented, California is going to take away all the limits of how much property you can have to qualify for Medi-Cal. The danger with that is that they may go to an income-only analysis, and that may not be as beneficial as we are today. So these are changes that are occurring in the world of Medi-Cal, and I urge anybody who's interested in understanding how this is, that you contact our office. We're going to be doing some advanced webinars on this subject also. So it's critical in my mind, because we're living longer, and as we age, we're again subject to disabilities of a certain kind, that you talk to us about how to protect yourself from these disastrous expenses. And also, we have another important, I'll call it, provision in our trust documents, and that is that we provide in our trust documents the authority to engage in advanced Medi-Cal planning without having to go to court and ask for that permission. But this is absolutely critical to have, because if you don't have these I'll call it authorized planning options, you may have to go to court to get that permission, and the judge does not have to give it to you. So, change of ownership in property by sale, gift, inheritance carries with it potential pitfalls: tax avoidance, reassessment avoidance, Medi-Cal recovery avoidance, avoiding unintended consequences when there's a change of ownership. We can help you with this. We understand these rules. We can definitely help you. Now, my part of the presentation is complete, and now I have the pleasure of introducing Cindy Light again, Senior Vice President and Partner at Coldwell Banker Commercial. And so now I'm going to hand it over to Cindy, and I'm here to change the slides for you, Cindy.
Thank you, Robert. And thank you all for inviting me today to present to you about commercial real estate. It's obviously a little bit different angle than the rest of what Robert's presentation has been today, but certainly something that Robert and I feel should be considered within your portfolio. And as things are changing, with something that you should be knowledgeable about. So why do you want to be in commercial real estate? I don't know how many of you are familiar with commercial real estate, but there are many different facets to commercial real estate. And in essence, I always like to tell people that I'm involved with commercial real estate, and I do just about anything and everything other than sell or buy a home. So that can include industrial products, office products, investment products, and a lot of other categories. So as I mentioned, there are a number of different went too far. Okay, there we
You want me
go.
to go back one?
No, this is fine. This is fine. Thank you. There are a number of different areas within commercial real estate in our world, many of which, of course, you're familiar with, such as office and office products. Another subcategory of office is what we call medical office buildings, or referred to in the business as MOBs. Medical office is a very, very stable type of an investment in commercial real estate because, as we all know, doctors and dentists and specialists typically do not want to move. It's very, very time consuming, costly, and painful. So along those lines, there are many, many opportunities with as you see in this slide, multi-level office buildings, medical office buildings, and or something else called medical office condos that are very popular now in Southern California and throughout the states. So that's one area. Another one is industrial products, which is large warehouses, or another subset of that is something called flex space, which is a combination of industrial space with office space with under one roof. And these have become very, very popular, especially since COVID, in that, as everyone knows, during COVID, office workers went home, retail shopping centers and strip malls were closed, so on and so forth. But what did continue to grow and grow rapidly was the industrial sector. Think about it, everyone ordering things from Amazon and whatnot, most things were done online. So the industrial sector grew very rapidly through COVID and is continuing to grow, and a very, very solid investment. Now moving on to retail. Retail has changed, as we all know, over the years, especially with malls and what have you, and now they're going into repurposing retail centers to do different types of things, including what they call mixed use space, which what we're seeing throughout the country is some of these older properties, particularly shopping centers and what have you, are being changed to be retail and or office on the first, second, and third floors, and then residential housing on the additional floors on a multi-level building. So there's a lot of movement going on. I attend a lot of seminars and webinars and what have you to keep up to speed on all these changes. And the commercial real estate world is changing pretty rapidly, but also it's very solid. And we'll get into the reasons why we think that's a good option perhaps for you and your portfolio. But other options that you see in this slide, multifamily always has been very, very stable investment, continues to be with very good cap rates and good rates of return on that. Hospitality, again, changing, but coming back very strong now that COVID is hopefully wrapping up and moving on to the next phase. Hospitality is seeing a lot of growth in hotels and motels being built throughout the country. And of course, raw land is always a good investment as a long-term hold because they don't make land anymore, right? So that's something that we always consider in commercial real estate as a good stable investment as well. So residential versus commercial real estate, they're apples and oranges in my mind. Residential is a very personal thing. It's your home. It's where you and your spouse live. You raised your children there, grandchildren, multi-generation sometimes. Very personal and emotional type of an investment. Versus commercial real estate is just the opposite. It's very much based on analytics and return on investment and what's the bottom line and does it pencil or does it not? Does it meet the client needs or does it not? Or can we purchase something and make changes through tenant improvements to make it suitable for the client's needs? But it is a very strict business decision, if you will, versus residential, which is an emotional decision. So again, they're two different separate worlds. Even within Coldwell Banker as a corporation, we have two separate divisions, Coldwell Banker Residential and Coldwell Banker Commercial, which other large international firms do as well. And that's because they truly are two different worlds. And we have different forms, we have different databases that we use, and it's just different marching orders. So I want to make that very, very clear. They're two different worlds. language of commercial real estate. I just wanted to bring this slide up to give you an idea of how things work in my world. So for example, you can see on the left are the residential terms that I'm sure most of you are familiar with. And on the right are the commercial terms. So in essence, we're doing the same thing. We're helping the client to maneuver through the process to purchase real estate and do different things. And oftentimes it's a very similar environment, but we use different things. For example, an agent is a brokerage professional. A sale is considered a transaction. A customer is a client. And for now, with things have changed so much in the residential sector over the years, where you as homeowners or potential homeowners have the ability to go online and go to realtor.com or Redfin or Zillow or all these other databases to look for potential properties to buy and sell, and interface with Facebook and the MLS. And we have something comparable on the commercial world called LinkedIn, which is some of you may know that's more of a business profile, as well as equivalent to MLS's CoStar, LoopNet, and other databases. That's really the tools that I use that provide me a lot of information about what properties are available for lease, for sale, what the comparables are, the comps for sale purchase price, sales prices, lease rates, so on and so forth. So they're similar, but they're different. And again, I just wanted to point that out. What is commercial real estate? Again, as I pointed out, in my mind, it's everything other than a residential home. It falls into commercial real estate category. Time frame for commercial real estate is typically substantially longer than a home. A home, typically you will do a 30, 60, 90 type day of transaction. For commercial real estate, it may be quite a bit longer, and that's due to a number of things. There might be inspections, appraisals, tenant improvements, a lot of things that can take substantially more time, especially again now with going through COVID. Our timelines for commercial real estate and with respect to tenant improvements and build outs and so on has, as you can imagine, lengthened substantially due to supply and demand. So we have been struggling with getting product and getting things turned around in a timely fashion, not only for tenant improvements, but for build to suit, which is a very specific type of development type of project. Things just take longer. So keep that in mind as you become educated on commercial real estate, why you would want to give yourself enough time to make sure that everything's going to be done and done correctly. So again, as I mentioned earlier, it's business. Commercial real estate is all about, does this property make sense for my needs or my investment needs? It's not a personal decision, it's a business decision. It's very, very different. Leasing versus sales. So leasing, which I do quite a bit of both leasing and sales. Leasing typically is a very nice return on your investment because it's a very stable asset. So typically leases, regardless of the product sector, meaning office, industrial, retail, what have you, typically your leases will run 3, 5, 7, 10 years or longer. So these are very long contracts, commitments that a client would make, a tenant would make to the owner. And typically in the leasing environment in today's, with the inflation and the economy the way it is, we are seeing that the annual increase on those base lease rates is going up to about 4% annually to your bottom line. So if you start out with a client at, or a tenant at, $2 a square foot, you can calculate your 4% annual increase into that on an annual basis for how many years of term of the lease that you have. And typically with leasing, most tenants will ask for an option to renew. So they're happy they can stay in their facility and the property and continue to lease on for another 3, 5, 7 years or what have you. Versus sales, which again, sales is sales. So if you're buying and selling, you're making that transaction and or doing a 1031 exchange into another similar type of product, which you can easily do with accommodators in commercial real estate. And lastly, there's business brokerage versus commercial real estate. Again, very different. Business brokerage is selling the business versus selling the real estate. And they are two different things. They're two different worlds, but oftentimes we see them bundled together. So if you have a doctor, for example, wanting to sell his practice, he may also want to sell his real estate at the same time as a package, and or he may not. He may want to simply sell the practice, but keep the real estate as an investment and turn that new doctor, if you will, in this case, into a tenant. So they retain the asset, the real estate, and continue to have rental income from the new tenant. So again, different avenues here. So commercial real estate concepts, these are just some terms that are in my world on a daily basis. Net operating income, cap rate is basically the same thing as your rate of return, which is what a term that we use in commercial real estate to calculate what your annual return is going to be, monthly or annual return. Loan to value, very similar with residential leasing, which we've talked about. Rental versus usable square footage, again, with particularly office space. There's a difference between what's rentable, meaning the total square footage of that particular suite within a building, versus what is usable square footage. And oftentimes we have to educate tenants on the differences there, because their rent is adjusted on their rentable square footage. So when you get into all these types of things with the leasing element within commercial real estate, you're talking about different types of leases, gross leases, meaning that all the utilities and so on are included in the rent, versus a net type of an environment where the landlord is passing on the true expenses that the landlord incurs, which will typically be your taxes, insurance, and maintenance, referred to as, you see, triple net. That's the 3 capital N's there. That's a triple net lease. So what they do in that case, which mostly is seen in retail shopping centers, the landlord is passing on the true actual expenses that they incur for taxes, insurance, and maintenance based on the square footage for each tenant. And it's a formula that's calculated based on square footage and their true expenses, and landlords cannot have a profit on those nets. So it's a true pass-through that's reconciled annually. And gross and electric, just a different type of a lease, and something in the bottom there, letters of intent. This is typically how we begin a process within commercial real estate, which is writing what's called a letter of intent or an LOI, which in essence just is a suggestion of what that particular client is wanting to do, what they're willing to offer, whether that be for a purchase, a sale, or a lease. It's the terms, conditions, and any other information that needs to be conveyed to the buyer, seller, or the landlord. In today's world, as we all know, with what's gone on over the last few years with COVID and all the changes that have occurred through those last couple of years, in addition to what's happening in the world with the war and with inflation, what we're seeing is that obviously the stock market is very volatile. I can attest that for myself. And so what Robert and I have been discussing is, as a particular element, the consideration should be that perhaps you would want to consider using commercial real estate as an avenue to broaden your portfolio, and certainly have a little bit more stability in long-term investments, because typically with commercial real estate, it is a long-term investment that's going to sit there for many, many years. And so part of the thought process that Robert and I have been discussing is just simply that you might want to consider perhaps changing your portfolio in some capacity to take into consideration commercial real estate in your overall total package. So with that said, pardon me, how would I get started? If you have interest in commercial real estate or learning more about it, I am certainly here to help you and or connect you with my colleagues throughout the country through the Coldwell Banker Commercial Network, that are professionals that only do commercial real estate as their practice of living. There are all kinds of things you can go through on Google for informational interviews, educational seminars, lots of mentorships out there to help you get started, financial resources through your bank, where you currently bank, your banks or your credit unions or whatever. They will typically have connections for you to also help educate you on commercial real estate, and talk with you about how compensation is structured and the lexicon of terms. It's again, a whole different world of commercial real estate, and how basically learn the lingo so that you can be educated and talk intelligently within this world. And this is just a quick overview of CBC, our Coldwell Banker commercial market coverage. We, as you can see, have offices all over the United States as well as abroad. We are an international company and we are a very close-knit group. Just came back from our conference in Austin where we had people attending from all over the world. So wherever you may have an interest in looking into commercial real estate, there's quite a bit of opportunity right now in Europe and Asia and whatnot. We certainly could accommodate those needs as well. So again, just why Coldwell Banker? As Robert mentioned earlier on, I'm Senior Vice President and Partner with Coldwell Banker Commercial, covering Southern California. And I've been with the firm since we bought the franchise 11 years ago. And we are one of the largest worldwide brokerage firms in the world. I am considered a senior real estate specialist, so I do quite a bit of work with senior clients in looking at their total portfolio and how perhaps we can move some things around and help manage your assets in a little bit more of a diverse environment. We are a global luxury real estate partner, both on the Coldwell Banker commercial side, as well as Coldwell Banker luxury home side, which again, of course, we're under the same umbrella with Realogy. So we have a close connection with Coldwell Banker residential folks as well. So if you do have needs with a home or something of that nature, we are able to help you with that as well. We are an advocate for the senior population because we feel very strongly, as Robert does, that we want to protect your assets and all of your hard work that you've managed for many, many years to the best of our ability. We have an expert referral source, so we can, again, as I mentioned, trade things throughout the country or internationally if we need to. And I believe very strongly in taking very, very good care of my clients. I've known Robert for over 40 years, and he's actually been a client of mine too. And we just believe very strongly in taking care of our clients to the best of our ability. So if there's any questions that you have or anything you would like to discuss, I am available. I think you just posted, Trish, my email address and my phone number. Feel free to reach out to me. I am happy to help in any way I can. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cindy. That was very informative. For those of you who do not know who Kopenberger and Kopenberger is, we've been open since 1979 as a law firm. There are 7 full attorneys and 1 attorney of counsel, and half of us are certified specialists in probate, estate planning, and trust law, and half of us have advanced tax degrees. And we have 7 office locations, and we have meetings obviously in person or by Zoom or by telephone. And again, we like to partner with fantastic companies like Coldwell Banker to help our clients. And with that, I just want to thank you very much, and I appreciate your participation. And I'm going to now end the presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.